I sat at the far end of the glass-walled conference room, the kind where every breath felt monitored, every glance a silent calculation. The air was too clean, too sterile, like even the oxygen had been filtered through a PR department. Damien stood at the head of the long table, basking in fluorescent glory, his suit crisp, his smile the perfect balance between confident and rehearsed. I didn't say a word. I just watched. He thrived under lights like these. It wasn't about the work for him. It never was. It was about appearances, performance. He was the kind of man who learned just enough language from the smart ones to impress the powerful ones. And today, he was about to learn what it felt like to reach for a crown that didn't belong to him. My pilot project, 4 months of sleepless nights, code revisions, dead ends, breakthroughs, now sat in a folder he was pretending to understand. Not even pretending well. I could see it in the way he held the clicker too tightly. The way his eyes darted across the room like he was measuring reactions before he'd even said anything. He had stolen the files, or so he thought. I had stayed late last night, told Soraya I'd be home by midnight, and then watched the clock until everyone left the office. I moved through the shadows of our department like a ghost. Not out of guilt, but precision. I removed every critical file from the shared drive, copied them to my encrypted storage, and left behind just enough to bait him into walking into his own trap. It wasn't personal, not in the traditional sense. It was strategic, because a man like Damien, my wife's brother or not, needed to be seen for what he truly was. He didn't stab people in the back. He smiled, asked you to hand him the knife, then walked on stage like he invented steel. He had come to me months ago with his usual blend of charm and ignorance, asking for help with understanding the infrastructure. What he meant was, show me everything so I can call it mine. I didn't say no. I said, sure, let's work on it together. And I did, because I wanted him to think he was winning. I wanted him to believe I was the fool. Now the room was full. Executives lined the table, VPs, project managers, senior engineers, and even Madeline Reese, the iron-willed VP of strategy whose words could sculpt or bury careers. All of them sat ready, their pens poised, waiting for brilliance, waiting for Damien to deliver what he'd promised. I leaned back, resting my arm across the chair beside me. My wedding ring caught the light, a small, sharp glint. Soraya's brother. My wife. My family. Some boundaries were meant to hold. Others were meant to be redrawn. This moment was for the redrawing. Damien cleared his throat, projecting confidence. Thank you all for being here, he began, voice smooth like a man who'd practiced that line in a mirror. I'm excited to walk you through what we've been developing behind the scenes. A new systems integration model that I believe will streamline operations and increase productivity across departments. He paused for effect. They nodded politely. No one blinked. I could tell he was waiting for the click, the satisfying shift of the screen, the surge of visuals to carry his empty words. But what he didn't know yet was that the screen would remain still. The files he needed? Gone. The content he planned to ride to glory? Deleted. The only thing that would appear when he pressed that button would be what I left behind. A single, intentional ghost. He hadn't earned this moment. He had siphoned brilliance and wrapped it in a tailored suit. But theft only works if the owner stays silent. I hadn't stayed silent. I had stayed patient. And now, as he stood there with a clicker in one hand and a lie in the other, I could already see the cracks forming behind his eyes. His feet shifted. He glanced at me once, quick, nervous, but I offered nothing in return. Not yet. Behind him, the screen remained blank. The company logo hovered, waiting. The audience leaned forward, expecting momentum. Damien turned slightly, pretending to pace, pretending this was part of the build-up. But his knuckles had turned white around the remote. His eyes flicked back to the screen. He pressed the button again. Nothing. And again. Still nothing. He tapped it this time, as if maybe force would solve what intelligence couldn't. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I felt the beginnings of justice take form. Not the loud kind. Not revenge. Something subtler. Like gravity shifting ever so slightly in my favor. The setup was complete. He didn't know it yet, but the spotlight he craved had become an interrogation lamp. And I was the quiet answer in the corner, waiting to be called. He cleared his throat again, tighter this time. Looks like we're having a technical hiccup, he said, with that strained laugh people use when they're bleeding inside but trying to sell toothpaste. A few chuckles floated around the room, but Madeline didn't laugh. She narrowed her eyes. I felt the air turn colder. Damien reached toward the podium, fiddling with cables, blaming the network, the system, the universe. But it wouldn't help. Not now. Not today. Because the project he claimed was never his to begin with. And the only thing he'd rehearsed was someone else's genius. I crossed one leg over the other and looked at the screen one last time. Soon, that room would turn. Soon, he'd realize that slithering into power only works if no one's watching. But I'd been watching, and now it was time for everyone else to see. He clicked the remote. Nothing. Just the company logo frozen on the massive screen like a dare. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in the room. It vibrates, stretches itself across the backs of necks and presses against the pulse in your throat. He tried again. Still nothing. Another click, and this time his thumb pressed harder, like the remote was just being stubborn and all it needed was a little force. I watched his jaw tighten, that confident curve of his smile faltering just slightly at the corners. The polish was still there, but now it had the faint smell of desperation behind it. Damien let out a laugh, thin, brittle, too sharp around the edges. Technical hiccup, he said, glancing back at the audience of senior executives and department leads as if to charm them into forgiving the stall. It happens. He turned toward the tech assistant near the door, motioning like he might need help. But the assistant just stood there, puzzled, blinking at the frozen screen like everyone else. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed lightly. I wasn't smirking, wasn't gloating. I didn't need to. The truth didn't need applause. It only needed time. He tried again. Click. Nothing. One more time. And then, finally, something shifted. But it wasn't the triumphant introduction he was hoping for. It was a single slide. White. Blank. Except for one line of text in black, centered clean and bold. Hope you practiced. A breath hitched in his throat, audible even from where I sat. The room didn't gasp, didn't roar. No, they did something worse. They got quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet where people exchange glances without moving their heads. The kind where you can hear someone's heartbeat from across the room because everyone's trying to understand if this is a joke or a fire starting. Damien stared at the screen like he didn't know what planet he was on. Like those 4 words might rearrange themselves into something useful if he just kept blinking. Then came the stammer. Looks like a sync error. Not sure how that. Just give me a second. He clicked again. Nothing. Again. Still the same slide. Hope you practiced. His hands started to tremble, just enough that I noticed. He was trying to pull phrases from memory, trying to build the house from the outside in. But the thing is, when you've stolen the blueprint and never laid a brick yourself, it all falls apart the moment someone asks you to explain the foundation. He began to talk. Words fell from his mouth in fragments, some of them mine, phrases I recognized from our late-night sessions. The ones where he'd call sounding innocent, curious, maybe even humble. Isaac, I just need your insight on this module. Hey, I'm still learning the back-end integration. Can you walk me through it one more time? And I had. Every time. I walked him through it slowly, clearly. I taught him how the system worked. I gave him words to memorize, but not to understand. Now those same words were being spit out into the air with no structure, no flow, no meaning. Like someone trying to describe a painting they'd only seen the corner of. The integration module reduces cross-platform redundancy by creating an efficient, loopback. Well, actually, we leverage parallel syncing. He was unraveling. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no storming out. But that was what made it worse. Because Damien had always counted on charm. He thought people were too distracted by confidence to check for substance. He was wrong. And now the entire room was watching him fold, silently, like a suit crumpling in slow motion. I glanced at Madeline Reese. Her lips were tight. Her eyes locked on Damien, but they weren't confused anymore. They were calculating. Disappointed. She wasn't just wondering why this was happening, she was figuring out how long it had been happening. How many other projects he had glossed over. How many other rooms he'd fooled. The CTO leaned forward, whispering something to the head of engineering. I didn't hear it. Didn't need to. I knew the shape of that whisper. I had lived with it for months. He didn't build this. Where's the real work? Was he just a face? Damien kept going, like someone drowning mid-sentence. The metrics. Our pilot study revealed a 14%. Actually, maybe it was 11.2. Uptick in platform optimization. Wrong numbers. Made up metrics. A blur of half-remembered data. He paused, looked around, eyes darting from one face to another, hoping someone would nod, help him bridge the gaps. But no one did. Not one person rescued him. Not because they didn't care, but because they were finally seeing him. Not the suited version. Not the man in boardroom lighting. Just the shadow. Just the echo of someone who had never been the source. He turned toward me. For a second, less than a breath, I thought he might call my name. Invite me to take over. Admit defeat. But he didn't. His pride was still standing even as his presentation was in ashes. I looked down at my laptop, already open, the full deck ready with every line, every chart, every animation. My fingers rested on the trackpad. I didn't move. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Not until he tried everything. And failed. The slide behind him didn't change. It sat there like a verdict. Hope you practiced. He cleared his throat one last time. We'll circle back. I'll get the files resynced and follow up with an updated deck via email. Apologies for the delay. But no one was fooled. Not anymore. He set the clicker down. Carefully. Quietly. Like he didn't want it to clatter and make the collapse real. Then he stepped back from the podium, his smile gone, his eyes dimmed, the spotlight that once danced around him now flickering like it had found the wrong man. I closed my laptop. For now, the room didn't move, but I could feel it shift. He had been the main act, but the audience was still waiting for a show. Damien stood there, empty-handed and cornered by his own arrogance. Yet he kept speaking, like momentum alone could cover up the lack of substance. But I knew what I was hearing, my own words, fractured, diluted, shoved into the wrong mouth. He started describing the core mechanics of the platform design, things we had spent countless nights discussing over takeout and whiteboards, but he didn't understand them. Not really. He could parrot terms like dynamic schema evaluation or parallel input flow, but he didn't know how to use them in a sentence that actually meant something. Not without me. He kept pacing slightly, glancing at the still screen like the visuals might somehow conjure themselves if he talked long enough. The irony was sharp. He'd stripped my work of its design, my voice of its cadence, and now stood in front of the firm's decision-makers sounding like a student faking a book report based on the cover art. My cover art. The room wasn't reacting, not with noise, at least, but the tension had teeth. People leaned forward, pens stopped moving, and eyes narrowed. They were listening not to be convinced, but to be sure of what they were starting to suspect, that he was stalling with someone else's brilliance and hoping no one would notice. I knew every line he stumbled over, every phrasing he butchered. They were mine. I remembered the night he first asked about the structure of the adaptive learning algorithm. It was nearly midnight. He'd called me saying, "Hey man, I'm stuck. Can you walk me through how the platform identifies redundant inputs?" I had. In detail. I even sketched it out on a napkin while Soraya slept on the couch, unaware her brother was using me to build a lie. He had nodded through the video call, scribbling notes he pretended were for learning. But they were for performance. Now he was trying to regurgitate that exact explanation, except it was all wrong. The system runs a sweep for repeat query patterns, he said, voice too fast. Like predictive text, but on, enterprise data layers. His hands moved in odd circles as if he could physically push understanding into the air. Then came the killer, he said, like Isaac always says, the beauties and the guesswork. I blinked. That wasn't what I said. Ever. What I had said, many times in fact, was the beauties and the precision. Precision. That was the whole point of the engine. There's no guesswork in clean code. The system doesn't guess, it learns. I watched Madeline's eyes flick to me like a sniper sighting a clean shot. That subtle moment of confirmation. The mistake wasn't just in the content, it was in the distortion. He'd quoted me. Misquoted me. Used my phrasing without my permission and got it wrong. That was worse than theft. It was impersonation without rehearsal. Julia from finance tilted her head, then leaned toward the director of operations and whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I could read the rhythm of it. He doesn't know what he's talking about, does he? There's a way people whisper when they've crossed the line from giving you the benefit of the doubt to realizing they made a mistake by ever doing so. But Damien didn't stop. He launched into another section, this one about projected optimization rates. And again, it was my language, my concept, my architecture, but delivered like a child trying to mimic a grown-up. By the third cycle, the system is kinda smart, right? It, filters out the low-value queries, like junk mail. He trailed off, waiting for a laugh. No one laughed, not even out of pity. His attempt at relatability landed like a thud against the back wall. What I had actually designed was a self-prioritizing filter queue with layered heuristics to detect and suppress data noise based on context. There was nothing casual about it. It was precision-built to handle enterprise-scale requests in real time. But Damien couldn't describe that because he never understood it. He only knew the name of the engine, not how the gears turned. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something had settled. Not rage, not even pride, just clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when the storm finally passes and you're standing in the aftermath, bone dry while everyone else is still ducking for cover. I had waited for this moment, not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because I wanted the truth to speak for itself. I didn't need to raise my voice. He was unraveling under the weight of words that didn't belong to him, and he knew it. Every time he said something wrong, the silence in the room deepened. He said user mapping fields when he meant input pathway notes. He said automated spreadsheet cleanup, like we were still working in Excel macros and not a dynamic machine learning platform. It was like listening to someone describe a cathedral by saying it's a nice building with windows and stuff. Then it happened. He reached a section he didn't even know was missing. The part one had deliberately scrubbed from the folder. The part with the predictive failsafe mechanism. He looked up, confident at first. Then his voice faltered. And finally, the system's response engine ensures, well, it runs a fallback thing in case of, like, overloads. There was no saving it, no polishing it. The words weren't just wrong. They weren't even present. He stood in front of a room of high-level professionals with nothing but the air between him and truth, and I could see in his eyes that he finally understood he'd gone too far. Not just today, but in every call, every ask, every stolen conversation. The man who once thought himself clever enough to steal my voice had just proven to a room of witnesses that he couldn't even mimic it. My fingers hovered over my laptop's keyboard, ready. Not eager, not vindictive, just prepared. And when Madeline finally turned to me, her voice calm but sharp, "Isaac, do you have the version you were working on?" I gave her the simplest answer in the world. I do. Because I always did. As I stepped forward to begin the formal walkthrough of the presentation, the subtle shift in the room crystallized into something unmistakable: attention. Not politeness. Not passive observation. Full, undivided attention. You don't often get that in a boardroom. People fidget, check their phones, think about their lunch orders or their unread emails. But not now. Now, I was gravity. Every face tilted toward me, every eye locked on the screen or flickering to my gestures. It wasn't because I was loud. It was because everything I showed them was undeniable, logical, beautiful, alive. The first slide glided forward with clean motion, revealing a dynamic chart tracking user behavior and system adaptation across departments. The layout was surgical, white space, elegant typography, intuitive flow. And the brilliance wasn't in the polish. It was in the structure beneath it, the architecture Damien could never replicate. Because polish is external. What I built was internal. Breathing, functioning, designed to evolve and learn. And now, I was doing what I did best. Not performing, not persuading, just explaining. With clarity, with fluency. Every phrase that came out of my mouth had weight because I understood every layer of what I was showing them. This wasn't some Frankenstein slide deck slapped together with buzzwords. This was the result of nights I couldn't sleep because my mind was mapping out logic branches and failure pathways. This was the code I had written at 3 a.m. with a cold cup of coffee in one hand and a browser full of error messages in the other. I turned to the second section. Here's the data flow when two departmental systems overlap. Instead of triggering redundant calls, the system now flags and defers lower priority actions based on user role, timestamp behavior, and engagement thresholds. It's faster, more efficient, and it avoids conflict before it begins. The CTO leaned in. How did you weight the thresholds? I tapped the arrow key and brought up a layered overlay. By adaptive scoring. We fed the initial model 5 months of real usage logs. Each behavior was indexed, click patterns, response times, access frequency, then assigned a dynamic coefficient that evolves with engagement trends. It's not static. It learns. There was silence. Madeline didn't take notes. She didn't have to. She was too busy listening. Her eyes followed the flowchart I displayed next, one that visualized how user permissions adjusted in real time based on interaction history. "And this is live?" she asked. I nodded. "It's been live in testing mode since last Wednesday. We've got logs." I saw Damien flinch in my peripheral vision. He hadn't known that. Of course he hadn't. He'd stolen a snapshot. A static image of a moving target. Meanwhile, I had been in the trenches, evolving the system, fixing the bugs, recalibrating performance. He didn't even know the shape of what this had become. I designed the interface to account for user friction, I added. If someone clicks the same tab more than 4 times in a minute, it suggests they're lost. That behavior flags a recommendation system that simplifies their dashboard within the session. Reduces bounce rate by 26%. A few eyebrows rose. Someone even whispered, "That's genius." I didn't react to it. I didn't need to. I moved to the final slide of this section and clicked once more. The interface demo played, and the system adjusted itself on screen. Real-time, adaptive, intuitive. This is what we're rolling out if Phase 2 is approved, I said. Not a concept. A working foundation. I wrote the core logic in C++ with a Python layer to handle adaptive behavior. All commits are logged. Dates, timestamps, everything. Julia from finance, who had barely spoken all morning, raised her hand. Sorry, just to clarify, you finalized this last Wednesday? I nodded, finally glancing over to Damien for the first time since I took the floor. His face had gone from red to pale, like the heat had drained from him completely. His mouth was slightly open, eyes darting as if he were still searching for an angle that didn't exist. Wednesday night, 10:41 p.m., I said. I have the commit log if anyone wants to verify. You'll see a commit hash with metadata. And before that, you'll see 2 weeks of incremental pushes that shaped this final version. Madeline let out a breath through her nose. Her version of a smile. That won't be necessary, she said. But the edge in her tone made it clear. It might have been if someone else had claimed ownership. I kept going. By the time I reached the module on data compression and cost-saving analytics, I could see executives leaning forward in their seats. Not because I was dazzling them, but because I was showing them what they hadn't realized was possible. This wasn't a pitch anymore. It was a preview. A working glimpse of something that solved 3 problems they didn't even know were connected. It wasn't about a man talking over slides. It was about the system itself, proving its own worth every time I advanced the deck. I finished my presentation not with a grand closing line, not with a flourish, but with a simple truth. This is version 1. The foundation. The engine's built. The system is scalable, modular, and secure. We're ready. Silence. Then a breath. Then Madeline nodded. We'll move forward with the rollout. I want a cross-department task force launched by Monday to assist with integration. Isaac, you'll lead it. I didn't smile. Not out of coldness, but control. I simply nodded and said, of course. Damien didn't speak. Didn't move. He looked like someone waiting for a train that never arrived. The spotlight he had once basked in now hung over me, but it wasn't blinding. It was warm. Earned. It didn't scorch, it clarified. As I packed up my laptop, people started murmuring, not in scandal, but in strategy. The CTO approached me directly. I'd like to sync on Wednesday. Dive deeper into the architecture. This is the real deal, Isaac. That phrase echoed. The real deal. Not the loudest. Not the flashiest. But the one who did the work. I walked out of that room not as someone who won a battle, but as someone who had built something so solid, so complete, that no lie could stand on top of it without crumbling. I didn't need to announce that I was the architect. The room already knew. I didn't look at Damien until I was already halfway through the walkthrough. Not because I was avoiding him, but because I had no reason to. He had removed himself from the equation the moment he tried to present my work without understanding it. And in that silence, the deep, heavy kind that follows exposure, he had started to evaporate. But curiosity, even injustice, has a gravitational pull. So when I finally glanced at him, the image hit harder than I expected. He was pale. His hands were flat on the table, knuckles tight, shoulders slouched forward like the air had betrayed him. His lips were parted slightly, as if he were mid-thought but couldn't summon the words. Or maybe he was waiting for them to arrive. They didn't. He looked like a man who had always relied on charm to carry him through rooms like this, and suddenly found himself without a script, an ally, or an escape. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was devastatingly quiet. That was what silence did. It didn't punish you with noise. It suffocated you with the absence of defense. I continued the walkthrough, my voice level, steady, grounded in facts. I wasn't performing. I was reporting, presenting data and structure, demonstrating functionality. The real work didn't need exaggeration. It had already proven itself. The dashboard displayed key analytics, projected efficiencies, lowered operational costs, seamless departmental cross-functionality. Everything worked. No glitches. No buzzwords. Just precision. Julia raised her hand from her spot beside the CTO. Isaac, when exactly did you finalize the model's output logic for the testing suite? I didn't look at notes. I didn't blink. Wednesday night. 10:41 p.m., I replied. I pushed the final commit from my terminal. Versioned and logged. I can share the commit history if you'd like to review timestamps. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in confirmation. She nodded, jotting the detail down as others began to shift in their seats. Subtle movements, murmurs behind fingertips, nods exchanged across the table. People were recalibrating their mental diagrams of the company. It happens fast in rooms like this. One moment someone is at the center, the next moment they're a footnote. And Damien had just become a footnote. What made it worse, for him, at least, was that I wasn't gloating. I wasn't pounding my chest or taking victory laps. I was calm, quiet, and that calmness hurt more than any confrontation ever could. Silence doesn't make noise, but it makes truth deafening. He had made himself look like a man who needed to be defended, and no one defended him. I advanced to the final slide, a timeline for Phase 2. The rollout sequence had been refined down to weekly benchmarks, with measurable objectives and task assignments already labeled in the interface. It wasn't just ready. It was waiting. All it needed was a green light. When I turned back to the room, my eyes passed over Damien briefly again. He still hadn't spoken, still hadn't looked up. His pen lay on the notepad in front of him, unmoved. Maybe he was waiting for someone to save him. Maybe he was still clinging to the belief that his name, his connection to Soraya, to me, would buffer the blow. But no one even said his name. They didn't need to. He wasn't part of this anymore. Madeline broke the silence first. Clean presentation. The projections line up. We'll greenlight the integration team. Isaac, I want you as the point lead, with weekly check-ins. First draft of task assignments by Monday. I gave a slight nod. Understood. She closed her folder, and that single gesture seemed to seal the verdict. The rest followed her lead. Closing laptops, standing slowly, offering brief nods of approval. Some stayed behind to ask me clarifying questions, the kind that show you they're already pulling you into future planning. I answered them patiently, concisely. Never once bringing Damien into it. Never once trying to draw blood from an exposed wound. When the room cleared out, Damien was still in his chair, staring forward, not even pretending to look busy. I walked past him without a word, carrying my laptop against my chest like armor I no longer needed. As I reached the doorway, I stopped. Not for him. For myself. I turned slightly and finally let my gaze land on his. He didn't speak. His eyes said enough. They weren't angry. They weren't even apologetic. They were lost. The eyes of someone who had built a house out of mirrors and just realized everyone else could see through the glass. You still don't get it, do you? I asked, my voice low steady. He blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but there was no sentence to follow it. This isn't about humiliation, I said. This is what happens when you try to take credit for something you didn't build. The silence you're hearing now? It's what the truth sounds like when no one has to argue it. Still nothing from him. Just the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Next time, I added, try doing the work. And then I left. The hallway outside felt warmer. Not triumphant, just real. Like stepping back into a world where gravity made sense. Where merit mattered more than connections. Where silence didn't protect liars. It exposed them. By the time I reached my desk, my inbox had tripled in size. Calendar invites. Meeting requests. Subject lines with words like lead, next phase, insight. My name was attached to everything now, not because I had demanded it, but because the work had proven it. As I leaned back in my chair and looked out across the office floor, I thought about all the hours I'd poured into that project. The skipped dinners. The notebooks full of scribbled logic trees. The time Soraya asked why I was still up at 2 a.m. tweaking syntax. And I realized that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say isn't a speech. It's silence. Backed by the kind of truth that doesn't need defending. Let the others fill the air with noise. I'll let the work speak. He waited for me in the hallway. The meeting had ended over an hour ago, but Damien lingered, away from the glass walls, the conference table, the laptops filled with evidence he couldn't contest. He stood in the corridor like a man freshly carved from stone, arms folded tight across his chest, jaw set, eyes rimmed with a cocktail of shame and something too proud to admit it. He didn't speak right away. Just watched as I stepped past the frosted doors, my laptop in one hand, phone buzzing quietly in the other with fresh meeting invites and messages of congratulations. Isaac, he finally said. Sharp. Clipped. I stopped but didn't turn right away. I knew that tone. The desperation packed tight behind a veneer of control. When I did face him, the hallway felt smaller than usual. More narrow. Like the air between us had weight. He stepped closer. Not threateningly, but with purpose. Why would you do that? His voice cracked at the edge, a fraying rope straining to keep composure. Do what? I asked calmly. You know what, he snapped. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. I tilted my head slightly. Is that what you think happened? He shifted, jaw clenching. You stood there like a hero while I was made a fool in front of everyone. You let it happen. You planned it. I didn't plan anything, I replied. I responded. He blinked. You took my work, Damien. You knew exactly what you were doing. You copied the files, stripped the names, tried to stitch together a presentation from scraps of my ideas. Then you walked into that room like it belonged to you. You didn't even ask me. I thought we were working together, he said, but his tone betrayed the lie. Even he didn't believe it. No, you didn't. You thought you could get away with it. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Don't pretend this was some misunderstanding. You didn't forget to give credit. You removed it. You rehearsed my words, pitched my system, and planned to walk away with the credit like it was your birthright. So no, I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did it to stop you. His mouth twitched, trying to find the next excuse, the next soft landing. I was under pressure. They're always watching me, comparing me to Soraya. You know how it is. My eyes narrowed. So your solution was to steal from the guy your sister married? His silence was the first honest thing he'd offered all day. I carried you for months, I said. I answered your calls at night. I walked you through logic diagrams you didn't even pretend to understand. I spent weekends writing code while you memorized sentences. And every time I handed you something, I told myself maybe this time you'd learn. Maybe you'd try to understand instead of imitate. But you never did. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he muttered. But you did, I said. You just thought I wouldn't say anything. He stepped back slightly, eyes flickering toward the floor, as if he could find a better version of himself in the tiles. You could have talked to me, pulled me aside. You didn't have to expose me. I laughed under my breath, not from humor, but disbelief. You exposed yourself, Damien. You clicked the remote. You stood in front of those people. You opened your mouth. All I did was watch. His face twisted, a flicker of resentment lighting behind his eyes. You made me look like a joke. No, I said. You made yourself look like a thief. And not even a good one. That one hit. I saw it. His nostrils flared. His lips parted like he might throw another defense out, but it caught in his throat before it formed. He was unraveling all over again, but this time without the audience. Just me. Just the man he tried to outshine by stealing his light. I didn't think you'd do it, he said after a pause, voice quieter now. I thought you'd let me have this. And there it was. The truth, finally out. He thought I'd stay silent. He thought my loyalty to Soraya, or my patience, or my history of being the quiet one, would keep me in the background while he soaked in applause he didn't earn. Why did you think that? I asked. He didn't answer. I took a slow breath. You know what the worst part is? It's not even what you did. It's why you did it. You didn't just want success. You wanted the shortcut. You thought because people liked the way you talked, they wouldn't question what you said. You thought charm would outrun truth. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw him not as a rival or a threat, but as a man who had spent so long building a persona, he forgot how to build anything real. I didn't want to be in your way, he said softly. You weren't, I replied. You never were. You were just loud enough to make people think you were. He nodded faintly, not in agreement, in defeat. I glanced down the hallway, toward the elevator where the doors were already closing behind the last few stragglers from the meeting. I didn't need to be here anymore, and neither did he. Take some time, I said, turning to leave. Figure out what you actually want to be. Because this version of you, it doesn't work anymore. I walked away without waiting for a reply, not because I was done with him, but because he needed to sit in the silence, to feel the absence of applause, to hear, finally, what truth sounded like when it wasn't being drowned out by performance. As I reached my office and shut the door behind me, I let out a slow breath. The room was quiet. My inbox buzzed again, but I didn't check it. Not yet. I just stood there for a second, alone, and let the weight of it all settle. Damien wasn't just exposed. He was broken. But he wasn't the only one transformed in that hallway. So was I. By Thursday, Damien had become a ghost. Not the spooky kind that slams doors or rattles the blinds, but the quiet kind. The kind that lingers in the background, half forgotten, half avoided. He still came to work. Still clocked in. Still walked through the glass doors of our office building wearing the same pressed shirts and carefully styled hair. But everything about him was quieter. The click of his shoes didn't land with the same confidence. The greetings he used to toss across the room were gone. His chair at the morning check-in meetings? It stayed empty for 3 consecutive days before anyone even asked where he was. The people who used to laugh at his jokes now acted like they couldn't remember any of them. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. You could feel it. Damien wasn't just out of favor, he was radioactive. No one wanted to be seen aligning with someone whose credibility had disintegrated in front of leadership. Meanwhile, I was in meetings. Lots of them. My calendar filled faster than I could process. From quick stand-ups to hour-long sessions with the VP team, everyone suddenly wanted to hear what I thought. They asked me to review timelines, consult on design models, advise on implementation hurdles. I didn't gloat. I didn't strut. I just did the work. That had always been my weapon: consistency. On Friday morning, Madeline called me into her office. No warning. Just a short calendar invite with the subject line: next phase. Her office overlooked the west wing of the campus, sleek and sharp like her wardrobe. The blinds were drawn halfway, light pooling in quiet strips across the floor. She didn't waste time. "I want you leading phase 2. I blinked once. Not out of surprise. I had expected it after the response to the rollout deck. But because it was the first time someone had spoken the words aloud. "I'll authorize an expanded team," she continued, sliding a folder toward me. "You pick your people. Skip the politics." I opened it. 5 blank name slots under the heading, Core Architecture Group. "You're the real deal, Isaac," she added, not as a compliment, but as a statement of fact. "You're not just a solution. You're a strategy." For a moment, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was letting the words settle. "You're the real deal." For words that sounded like permission. Like confirmation that all those nights of sitting alone in front of a flickering screen hadn't gone unnoticed. All those hours where I felt invisible weren't wasted. They were building something too big to hide forever. "Thank you," I said finally. She gave a slight nod, then returned to her screen. The meeting was over, but the shift was permanent. As I walked back through the hallway, I passed Damien. He didn't look up. He was seated in the corner lounge near the coffee station, staring at a half-empty cup like it held answers. A tablet sat beside him, untouched. He used to tap it like a conductor, constantly scrolling, messaging, scheming. But now, it was just another prop. We didn't exchange words. Not even eye contact. But I noticed something. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't pretending to be busy. He was just sitting there, still. And that was more telling than anything he could have said. It was the posture of a man who'd realized his armor had been made of air. That weekend, Soraya asked about him. We were at home, in the kitchen. She stood at the counter, chopping onions for her famous chili, the scent filling the air with something warm and grounded. She didn't look up when she asked, "How's Damien holding up?" I wiped my hands on a towel. "Quiet. Is he okay?" Her voice had an edge of conflict. She wasn't defending him, not really. But he was still her brother. I paused, then said, "He's unraveling." But not from what I did. From what he tried to be. She nodded slowly. Then silence again, except for the clink of the knife and the faint hum of the stove. "I told him once," she said, "that you were the kind of person people remember after the noise fades." I looked at her. She still didn't turn, just kept cutting, steady, careful. "He didn't believe me," she added. I didn't respond. There wasn't much else to say. I kissed her on the cheek before leaving the kitchen. The weight of her words lingered with me. Monday came fast. My desk was flooded with follow-ups and internal requests. I reviewed documents, assigned roles, mapped out the next 10 weeks. I didn't see Damien at all that day. By Wednesday, word had spread. Not rumors, just quiet understanding. When people said phase 2, they meant my plan. When they said project lead, they meant me. And Damien? He was in his office less and less. His door stayed closed. The chatter about him died down, not with scandal, but with disinterest. It was as if he had become a cautionary tale no one wanted to name aloud. The most poetic part? No one needed to fire him. He was still employed. still technically on the team. But he had been exiled not by force, but by truth. People stopped asking for his input. Emails stopped including him. Invites dried up. The worst punishment for a man like Damien wasn't being cut out. It was being irrelevant. On Friday afternoon, I got a message from Madeline's office. Full leadership handoff authorized. You have discretion. Let me know who stays. No mention of Damien. Not a single word. It didn't need to be said. The room had already chosen. And I was the only one they wanted standing in it. It was raining the day Damien tried again. Not heavily. Just that kind of lazy drizzle that clings to everything without making a real mess, quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. I had stayed late, finishing documentation for the deployment packages and running final QA checks before handoff to the integration team. The office was nearly empty. Most had gone home by 6, retreating into their lives, their dinners, their weekend plans. I had grown used to that, being the last one in the building, the hum of the fluorescent lights above keeping me company while my cursor blinked like a heartbeat on the screen. I heard the elevator doors before I saw him. The chime echoed softly down the corridor, followed by his footsteps, familiar even now. He wasn't wearing his usual smug confidence. No blazer. Just a black hoodie pulled tight over his head like he was trying to disappear. I didn't flinch when I saw him. I just saved my work and leaned back in my chair. Calm. Ready. Not for a fight. Just for whatever was left. He stood there for a moment, dripping quietly on the tile, staring at me like I was a stranger occupying a life that used to belong to him. You made me look like a joke, he said finally. His voice had changed. No longer theatrical or charming. Just raw. And a little frayed. I didn't move. I didn't make you look like anything. You did that all by yourself. His jaw clenched. He stepped closer, like proximity might make his words land heavier. You stood there and watched me fall apart. You had that deck the whole time, and you just waited to humiliate me. I stood up slowly, not as a challenge, just so we were at level. I waited because you needed to see what you really looked like without someone holding you up. You think this makes you better than me? He asked. No, I said. I think this makes me honest. And I think you're not ready to admit how long you've been lying, not just to everyone else, but to yourself. He exhaled, hands balling into fists. You wanted this. You wanted to be the guy in charge, the one they talk about in meetings. You wanted to bury me. No, Damien, I said, voice even. I wanted credit for my work. That's all. I would have been fine if you just said, Isaac built this. I would have stood next to you on that stage, helped you through every slide. I've done it before. But you didn't want partnership. You wanted ownership of something you didn't earn. His mouth opened, but no words came. Just that stunned expression people wear when they realize the ground they're standing on isn't solid anymore. I didn't need to embarrass you, I continued. All I did was let the truth catch up to you. And trust me, it's quieter than revenge. But it lasts longer. He stared at me, searching for something pity, maybe. Regret. But I had none left to give him. This whole time, I said, you've been chasing recognition like it's a trophy. Something shiny you can hold up. But what you don't understand is, real recognition doesn't come with a prize. It comes with responsibility. Quiet ones. Long hours. Mistakes no one else sees. You didn't want the job. You wanted the spotlight. He shifted his weight like the words were heavier than he expected. You remember when we first started talking about the platform? I asked. You said, you're the genius, Isaac. I just know how to sell it. At the time, I thought that was self-aware. Now I know it was just a setup. Silence. Just the sound of the rain tapping against the office windows and the occasional beep from a printer left idle. I never needed to win, Damien, I said softly. I just needed the lies to stop. He shook his head, almost to himself. I didn't think it would end like this. I shrugged. Things usually end the way they were built. And you built this out of shortcuts. He turned to leave. For a moment, I thought that was it. But then he stopped at the door, shoulders tense. I'm not finished, he said. You may think you've won, but I'll find my way back. I nodded. Maybe you will. But next time, I hope you actually build something first. He left. No slamming doors. No final insults. Just footsteps fading into the hum of an elevator that didn't belong to either of us anymore. I stood there for a while. Alone. The office empty again. No applause. No crowd. No banner that read you did it. Just quiet. The kind that settles after the last storm has passed. And that's when it really hit me. There was no trophy at the end of this. No medal waiting for me on my desk. No handshake that made it all worth it. But there was something better. Truth. A clean, silent truth that didn't need to shout. It just existed. Fully, and without apology. That night, I walked to the parking lot slower than usual. The rain had let up, but the pavement still glistened. Reflections of the office windows shimmered under the streetlights like ghosts of long days. My car was parked in the same spot it always was, third row from the side, facing the old stone bench where people used to sit during lunch breaks before hybrid schedules emptied the courtyard. As I opened the door, I heard a voice behind me. "You changed." I turned. It was Soraya. She was standing near the bench, umbrella tucked under one arm, her hair a little damp at the ends. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Long enough," she said. There was something unreadable in her expression. Not disappointment. Not pride. Something quieter. Something sad. "I heard what happened," she said. "He told me his side." "I'm sure he did," I replied, trying not to sound bitter. She walked closer, arms folded against the chill. "I don't blame you," she said. "He was wrong. He crossed a line." I looked at her. "You don't have to defend me." "I'm not," she said. "I'm trying to understand how we got here." I didn't know how to answer that. "He's my brother, Isaac," she said after a moment. "But I know who he is. I hoped maybe he'd grow out of it." I nodded slowly. So did I. We stood there, the space between us stretched by more than just rain. "You hurt each other," she added. I shook my head. "No, he hurt himself. I just stopped protecting him." She looked down, then back at me. "You're different now." "I'm clearer now," I said. "I stopped waiting for people to see me. I showed them." She studied me. "Do you feel better?" I thought about it. The truth? I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like something had finally stopped spinning. "I feel, right?" I said. She nodded, slowly, the kind of nod that accepts something even when it hurts. "I'll talk to him," she said. "But I'm not going to try to fix this." "I don't expect you to." She stepped forward and kissed my cheek. Then she turned and walked toward her car. I watched her go. No fight. No drama. Just truth, walking away in the rain. I got into my car, started the engine, and sat for a moment. The dashboard glowed quietly. My name was no longer just attached to the project. It was etched into the future of something real, something that would outlive the noise. There would be more challenges, more meetings, more long nights, but they would be mine. No trophy, no parade, just the truth. And that was more than enough. 2 months later, I stood at the head of that same glass conference table, but the feeling was different now. The walls hadn't changed. Neither had the temperature, the lights, or the stiff leather chairs. But the atmosphere? It was electric. No tension, no hidden daggers behind polite smiles, just sharp, clear energy that hummed through every conversation, every handshake. Every person in that room knew why they were there. And this time, they weren't guessing whose idea they were listening to. They already knew. It was mine. Executives from regional branches had flown in. The director of technology from the East Coast, the CFO from our Dubai office, media reps tucked in the back corner with name tags and embargoed press kits. Even Soraya sat at the end of the table, hair pulled back, phone off for once, eyes on me. The rollout plan sat on the screen behind me, every slide refined to the bone. The system I had built, line by line, decision by decision, was no longer just a project. It was a product, a platform, a flagship, and it bore my fingerprints in every detail. I adjusted the mic clip to my collar and started without flourish. "Good morning. Thank you all for making the trip. You've seen the demo. You've reviewed the metrics. Today, I'll show you what comes next. The national expansion, the blueprint, the timeline, and the why." I watched them lean in, not in skepticism, but interest. Not one face glanced at their watch or their phone, because they weren't here out of obligation anymore. They were here because the numbers didn't lie. The efficiency increases, the user retention spikes, the predictive behavior patterns we'd refined. They had transformed us from a mid-level firm with big talk into an actual player. No fluff, no gimmicks. Results. The system adjusts in real time to departmental usage patterns. I continued. What we learned during the first rollout in the West region allowed us to reduce onboarding friction by 37% during Phase 2. With the new architecture, the learning engine now uses anonymized behavioral inputs to anticipate and remove bottlenecks before they form. I clicked forward. The slide changed, revealing a user journey heat map that pulsed with real-time interactivity. A few people murmured in quiet surprise as the engine adapted itself on screen. No other system currently deployed in our space can evolve this fast, I said, or integrate with legacy tools without requiring full retraining. That's where we win, not just in innovation, but in respect for what already works. At the end of the table, the VP of Operations from the Atlanta office raised his hand. How scalable is this under high-load conditions? If we roll this into both the APAC and Canadian regions simultaneously, does the AI engine prioritize by bandwidth or by behavioral impact? Behavioral impact, I said without hesitation. The engine throttles based on urgency and friction score, not just usage volume. And we've layered a caching buffer that offloads non-essential interactions when system strain hits a red line. No service delay, no data loss. Another nod, another confirmation. Every question now was a real one. Curious, thoughtful, engaged. I remembered sitting in that same room just weeks ago, invisible, while Damien tried to stitch my words into a show he couldn't sustain. Now, the room didn't just look at me. It listened. It aligned. I clicked to the final slide. It was simple, just 4 words. Phase 3, National Live. Silence followed, but the good kind. The kind that meant the message had landed, that they were already thinking about implementation, marketing, timeline logistics, not because they doubted, but because they believed, because it was real. I closed the deck. We launch next quarter. The teams are ready. The platform is ready. The future, if you'll let me be blunt, is under my name. And I'm ready to carry it. Applause. Actual applause. Not the stiff, polite kind. The kind that starts slow, grows, spreads. Even the media reps clapped. And across the room, Soraya clapped too. No smile. Just pride. Quiet. Deep. After the meeting, as people mingled, shaking hands and circling around to talk about press coordination and strategy calls, I slipped away and returned to my office. Not to hide. To breathe. To remember. My desk hadn't changed. Same chair. Same lamp. Same framed photo of Soraya and me from that trip to Lisbon we always said we'd recreate but never did. But there was something new. A folded piece of paper resting in the middle of my keyboard. No envelope. No name. I picked it up slowly. Unfolded it. 1 line. Written in shaky ink. I'm sorry. No signature. But I knew the handwriting. I sat down and stared at it for a long moment. Not out of anger. Not even surprise. Just stillness. The kind that follows when the dust has finally settled and you find yourself surrounded not by wreckage, but by the clean floor you swept yourself. I didn't tear the note. Didn't toss it. I slid it into the top drawer of my desk. Not because I wanted to remember Damien's apology, but because I wanted to remember that he had to write it. That he had reached the edge and realized it wasn't enough to charm his way back. That sometimes justice doesn't require vengeance. It requires time, patience, and the willingness to let someone fall under the weight of the very thing they tried to steal. That evening, I walked the halls of the office as the sun dipped outside the windows, gold light stretching across the tile like a quiet benediction. The place buzzed now, not with gossip, but with focus. A culture had shifted, not because I forced it to, but because I showed up, day after day, and let the work do the speaking. Soraya found me in the hallway near the lounge, where Damien used to hold court. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes soft. That was impressive, she said. I smiled. Thanks. She studied me. You seem different. Not happier. Just settled. I am, I said. For the first time in a long time. We walked back to my office together. No rush. No tension. Just quiet understanding between 2 people who had watched something fall apart and something better rise in its place. Before she left, she paused at the door. I think he meant it, she said. The apology. I believe he did, I said. Doesn't change what happened. But it matters. She nodded and left. Later that night, long after the office emptied out, I sat at my desk, hands folded behind my head, staring at the ceiling tiles. Not counting them. Just letting the silence settle. My name was on the door now. My code lived on every server. My vision was their future. And I had earned all of it, not by pushing people down, not by tricking the system, but by waiting, building, enduring. There were no fireworks, no victory speeches, just the quiet confirmation that I had built an empire from the inside out, and this time, no one could take it from me, not even the ones who tried.